Hey everybody, this is Alex with a rapid-fire style review for Amnesia Rebirth. As always, I want to provide a bit of context for the review, so for frictional games, I became a big fan of theirs after my first Amnesia Dark Descent playthrough 10 years ago. They then published, but didn't develop Amnesia A Machine for Pigs, which honestly wasn't nearly as good, and I won't hold that against them. But then they were back to form with Soma, which again was brilliant. It was far less spooky scary, but more cerebral, a science fiction horror game with an incredible story to tell. When they announced Rebirth earlier this year, it immediately got added to my list of most anticipated games for 2020. If it was anything like their first Amnesia, it was going to be one of my favorites of the year. The first Amnesia was so unsettling. Frictional seemed to have mastered the aspects of survival horror games where so many other developers failed. They had found a perfect balance of environmental darkness versus light sources. They knew that the scariest things were things that you didn't or couldn't see. They knew how important it was for you to feel like your character was actually in danger, providing real consequences for bad decisions or mistakes. They understood how tension is amplified when the player feels truly alone in the dark, and it was all wrapped up in a mysterious plot that the player is revealing piece by piece while delving into a dark manner. It was great. The problem is, 10 years is a long time to forget how to do things. Almost immediately, something felt off about Rebirth visually. Naturally, since you were in the desert, in the daytime, it's pretty bright out. It's damn near close to the sunniest possible place you could be on Earth, which isn't necessarily a problem, as then delving into the contrasting darkness of caves or something is sure to follow. And it does, but then that damn sun shines light into the caves too. And it's not just the beginning of the game either. The majority of the game you're running around during the daytime in well-lit areas. Now, there are dark sections that litter the game too, but when the dark, scary corridors are sandwiched between a sun-filled room and a room lit with 3 candles, 4 burning oil lamps, and a lit torch, it kind of lessens the impact of the darkness. The light balance just felt off for most of the game. And that's not to say that there weren't some excellently designed sections that with just the right amount of darkness and left us worrying what the scratching just up ahead was, if we could afford to use the lamp oil or the matches we had. They just didn't come up often enough. The rationing of resources is standard for horror games, and the Amnesia franchise is no different. In the Dark Descent, you found tinderboxes and lamp oil to light candles and torches, and had to be pretty careful about using them as you'd often run out. In Rebirth, we were downright wasteful with them, and we used several per section whether we needed to or not, and we were constantly full anyway. There is no fear of the dark here, because there really is none. Not really. There's too much light, natural and not. There's too much access to lamp oil and matches, which is a real shame, as the darkness adversely affecting the player's sanity was something I really enjoyed in the first game. The avoidance of the dark here just ends up being about avoiding what becomes very annoying sounds playing when you're in the dark for longer than a few seconds.
Your sanity back.
I don't need no sanity.
The well-lit areas also did a disservice to the monster design. Having a slow-moving monster, and they are very slow, chase you in either the daylight or a practically studio-lit room isn't as scary as it should have been. You ever walk into a dark room and see a stuffed animal or sweatshirt on a chair and it freaks you out? A tree's shadow from a window at night scare you? Well, that stuff doesn't happen with the lights on. As you explore and encounter the monsters, it becomes pretty apparent that you are unfortunately not in any real sort of danger. Most of the times you see the monsters, they're just scripted jump scares. And some of them are actually really good, but ultimately there's no consequence and there's no danger to you as a player.
Whack it. Whoa!
Your turn?
That was a good one. That was a good one.
I ain't just a bitch.
That was a
What
good
the fuck
one.
was that? What the fuck was that?
Almost didn't catch it.
Alright, which way did the motherfucker go? Left or right, chat?
It went right.
Right? Okay, we're going left.
In the few unscripted monster encounters, if you are caught by the slow-moving baddies, you can either wiggle your way to freedom, or if you don't, you fall asleep and wake up with no monsters in sight, apparently in no worse condition than when you started, except now there's no more threat, and in some instances actually puts you at the exit of a maze. quote-unquote dying in this game becomes a benefit, which is ludicrous. It's also their intention. They have announced that they want the story to shine here, so an interview said that this game was meant to be experienced as a story rather than as something to beat. So let's get on to that all-important story then. Overall, the story is a bit mixed. Like most horror games, it's probably best not to think about it too much, but if you want to, and since apparently the whole point of the game is the story, some of it is good. Some of it is really bad. It's a bit predictable, and when it's not predictable, it's so wildly outside of what we know for Amnesia that it truly doesn't feel like we're playing the right game. On the surface, Rebirth follows the story of a French archaeologist, Tassi, on an expedition in Africa. Unfortunately for her, their plane crashes in the desert, she wakes up to discover that all of her companions are gone, she has a cool new watch, and she has amnesia. Then she goes on a quest through the desert and onto other locations looking for her husband and team. Now in the background we have powerful themes of a loss of a child, grieving, second chances, and the value of life. But as the game moves forward, we have a Doom Eternal-esque storyline where the Vitae from the first Amnesia game turns out to be the main energy source for an entire trans-dimensional eldritch civilization who uses it to live forever, and so they have been mass harvesting and torturing human beings to get it. And also, the Vitae made the queen of this civilization infertile, so she wants to steal a human baby. So she uses her eldritch powers to make a plane crash in our dimension in 1937. But for the rest of the game, has no other powers at all to manipulate anything, or do anything, even in her own dimension. You spend the last half of this game in this other dimension where the lack of environmental context leaves you, again, absolutely free of worry, especially since at this point in the game you know that you cannot die or be hurt. But again, it's probably best not to think too much about the story because it is a horror game, even though they screwed over the gameplay to focus on that story. Mechanically, the game played well. We ran into no major bugs, no getting stuck in walls or doors like OJ likes to do, and we even tried.
Like this one.
So run. What the fuck is that?
Oh no.
Oh, I shouldn't have told Joe to run. Oh my god.
I can fix it! I can fix it!
My god.
I can fix it!
Oh shit! That actually did get me right there, cause I didn't expect that one.
Though turning wheels in this game is still awful with a mouse and keyboard like it was in the first games, and I'm told that on a controller there are other actions that are miserable too, they introduced this Traveler's Amulet mechanic to the game, allowing travel between dimensions, which could have been amazing, and they had a ton of potential uses for running from monsters and puzzles and all sorts of other applications, and they didn't do any of that. They did nothing with it. We opened portals and we found lamp oil a few times, and I guess that was neat. The puzzles we did find were intuitive, and they felt like they were in a good spot for difficulty. I particularly enjoyed the ones on the alien world playing with the technology that they had. Other than the awful sanity noises, the sound design for the game and background music was actually really good, and worked to kind of alleviate the other issues we had with the game's ambiance. Hearing monsters crawling, slurping, eating, sniffing, all work to add tension when there really wasn't any there. Look, this isn't the worst horror game we have ever played, not by a long shot. It has the same gameplay style and puzzles as both of their previous games, but with far less scares and atmosphere of The Dark Descent, and without the thought-provoking storytelling of Soma. Frictional is just suffering from their own pedigree here. They've put out 2 excellent survival horror games in the past, and then put out an average-ish one. They just did what so many other franchises did before them, failed to recapture the greatness and magic of their previous installments, and then put out something that was just barely achieved mediocrity. Kind of like Amnesia and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
That's why I'm down here.
And it's not just the rose tinting of the past either. We played both Dark Descent and Soma just a few months ago. For OJ, it was the first time, and he loved both of them. What the game's creative director said in an interview sums up my thoughts on the game pretty well. He said that instead of relying on short-term scares, the team believed that the game's overarching themes and narrative should be what haunts the player. This ultimately is where my problem is. The game is short on scares, like they planned, but the game's theme and narrative didn't end up being haunting at all. So we're left with a game which isn't very scary, a story that goes to crazy town, gameplay mechanics that were totally underutilized, all within an atmosphere that I didn't feel worked. So I have to give Amnesia Rebirth a slightly below average 4 out of 10. Again, it's not a terrible game, it's not a bad game, and if you love Amnesia, maybe this will be something that you enjoy. We just didn't. Let us know how you feel about the game in the comments, and we will see you on the next Angry Joe Show.